And I'm going to ask Mariah to kick us off here.
Yeah, sure. Well, hey, first of all, thank you, Chris, for letting us bookend the Ask Me Anything series and host the last one of the year. What an honor for us. And a very excited hello to everybody in the community. Today, we're going to cover a lot of ground, so I want to just go ahead and jump right in. Now, to kick off the discussion, I had asked Ron and Kunal earlier this week, what are some of the most frequently asked questions you're getting right now? Both of them spend an immense amount of time with customers. And for each of them, there were some hot spots on what they're being asked. So before I pop into the community's pre-posted questions and we get to yours in the chat, Ron, let's start with you on the topic of cloud. There continues to be a really strong directive around moving applications to the cloud. Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella was quoted in April of this year. In reference to the pandemic, he said something to the effect of like, hey, we've been talking about moving to the clouds for decades. This is the time we're doing it at scale, which it sounds really good in a quote. But what does it actually mean to move to cloud at scale? So my question to you is, as you speak with customers who are planning or in the middle of migrating to the cloud, what advice would you maybe give them on how they should measure the success of that in terms of speed of migration? So more specifically, maybe what's a reasonable target rate of moving applications to the cloud?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think there's quantitative things and there are qualitative ways to measure things. I think that having the CEO of Microsoft say that it's all moving to the cloud is obvious. But I can tell you that if I were a CIO, if I were responsible for applications of an entire company, my directive would be just move as quickly as possible. And I realize that there are a lot of security issues and maturity issues. I think having the quality that you get when you run on cloud versus when you manage everything yourself, and the simplicity of it trumps everything else, and the standardization trumps everything else. So I am so overwhelmingly pro cloud that I may not be the right person to ask, but that's just my personal opinion. In terms of what I'm seeing in our customers, the way they measure it, some of it measure it by time, and they say, okay, our goal is to be 100% on cloud by a certain date. I think that's what most people do, is they say, okay, I have certain targets by time on percentages. That's one thing I see a lot. Another thing I see a lot is everything new needs to be on cloud. And so, those are the obvious. The one that I heard the most recent, which I kind of liked, although it's you'll see in a second that it's very quantitative, but the devil's in the details. But the thing I heard very large customers say, our goal is to move 1,000 applications in 1,000 days. Okay, so and that's a very quantitative thing. And when you look at that, at first it sounds, I can't tell if it's slow or fast, actually, because 1,000 days is 3 years. And so, okay, 3 years is a long time, but on the other hand, 1,000 applications is a lot of stuff. And the devil in the details means, it depends what you call an application. Okay, if you're saying this is my, I don't know, my policy management system in an insurance company, that's a huge application. So is that one, or do they actually break it down? Probably it's 100 mini applications. So I don't know exactly what they mean. I do believe that. I really believe in cloud, and to me, if it was my responsibility, I would do things very aggressively. Like, it's very the memo that Bezos wrote that made Amazon use everything that AWS provided. I would say that that's the way to do things. As you just say, you got to do it. You got to do it by this date, and obviously you need to figure out what your security posture is, what your security controls are. But the measurements need to be somehow quantitative, otherwise they kind of get very fluffy and unclear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now I'm gonna to the community, I'm gonna move quickly from subject to subject, just because we have a lot of ground to cover with the different questions that were being asked. So I just encourage you that as we're talking to a subject, if you have specific follow-ups, clarifications, additional questions, definitely put them in the chat. I will weave them into the discussion as we go along. So with that, I want to move it over to Kunal for a moment. Just the other day too, when we were talking about frequently asked questions, you mentioned to me that you were having a lot of discussion with customers about fatigue. And fatigue can come in a lot of flavors, right? Fatigue can come in the flavor of shifting resources because of the situations the pandemic has created and the fact that teams are distributed and remote. It can come from the sense of being overwhelmed by alerts or doing a lot of data monitoring and not really knowing what to do with it. So can you share with us a few of what you would consider some of the most prevalent types of fatigue you're seeing, and maybe just a couple best practices or tips on how to tackle these different types of fatigue?
So I see a lot of fatigue when it comes to people who are rushing to transform. They get to the other side and then they're faced with challenges or they're faced with things that they didn't think about ahead of time. And so kind of what Ron was speaking to, we see a lot of people, we have a lot of customers that during the pandemic ended up doing a transformation. A lot of people that ended up adopting a cloud service provider, some didn't, some ended up maybe modernizing some of their applications or application workloads, some adopted things like APIs and microservices. And again, a lot of those people that ended up jumping in or going over there didn't realize a couple of things. I think there was sort of a lot of, and Ron hinted at this, there's a lot of people that jumped in to certain things, but they didn't necessarily think about security controls as an example. Just because you're moving to the cloud doesn't mean you have to throw away 20 years or 30 years of good network design and network security. A great interview question I always ask is, and ask any developer this in your own organizations, people that are moving to the cloud, have them explain to you what a subnet is. It's really hilarious because there's a lot of people that don't even know like the basics of networking when they move to things like the cloud. And so it's kind of funny to hear and see people that are making that change. I think there's two things that I would advise folks. One is do things like security architecture, do things like threat modeling up front when you are going to go through the transformation. That doesn't just necessarily mean you move to the cloud, but it also means if you are going to adopt a service-oriented design or a distributed architecture where you are looking at APIs, just because you use an API doesn't make you inherently secure. Just because you adopt a specification like the Open API specification could be through Swagger doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be secure, right? You have to like actually look at all these different components and understand what exactly you're going to get out of it and secure those individual pieces. And then the other part of it is the alert fatigue. Too many sensors, too many vendors, just a lot of insane information that are being thrown at lots of people. And those people are just sort of drowning in noise. They're drowning in fatigue. They don't know what to look at. They don't know what to do. And so what you often find is for people who are incredibly stretched that are securing hundreds or thousands of different types of workloads or data stores, they only look at a subset of things. And it's a real issue. And so it's a combination of adopting the right technology that's going to help you, not technology that's going to absolutely bury you. And I think one of the challenges that we see, and we work with obviously lots of organizations, is they may be biased to a technology or a preferred thing, but they get biased when they look at it through the lens of like a tiny proof of concept or like a small proof of value engagement. They don't actually think about at scale what it's going to mean for them. And so we really caution people when they think about adopting technology, whether it's Imperva or anyone else, don't think about it in a very narrow sense. Don't think about it as securing one workload or one data store. Don't think about it like that. Think about it in terms of having to protect the entire organization, and then think about how you're going to do it and leverage that technology with the same number of people that you have right now. Are you going to become more efficient? Are you going to become more taxed? Where are the potential pitfalls? So I would really focus on those two parts of this whole story.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it sounds a bit like a no-brainer, right? Coming from it top down. And I think we see a couple of takeaways here. Don't over-rotate. We have to transform fast, but do it with purpose, where you have both qualitative and quantitative aspects to it, and you're working backwards from a date. And be pragmatic about what that means and the changes that are going to be required and what security you're going to need in order to make that transformation happen. Especially.
So just to, sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead, Chris.
No, quickly. So considering everything that could go wrong in the absence of well thought out cloud remediation strategy, what is your thoughts there? Like just to kind of add to what you were saying, Kunal.
What are you referring to, like when things can go wrong? Or?
So Shamel mentioned, and Shamel, if you want to post a little bit more or ask a little bit more, but he just said considering everything that could go wrong on the absence of a well thought out cloud remediation, strategy, what's your thoughts around maybe what could go wrong, or what kinds of things should we think about there?
There's several elements. One is a cost element that we should definitely address. There's a lot of people that just kind of pick lots of services. They think it's cool, and they try to weave some of this stuff together, but they don't actually marry these things back to the amount of information that needs to be processed. They don't think about I/O. They don't think about storage, and storage is obviously really cheap now with things like the cloud services providers or what they're doing. But a lot of people are not necessarily thinking about how much money things are going to cost, and they get surprised. I remember when Lambda first came out, a lot of companies that we work with were very surprised when they got their very first Lambda bill, because they had functions that were calling each other, and they were constantly keeping themselves up. And so they created these interesting recursive loops between their functions, and they were really surprised when they got large bills from AWS, which of course AWS was really kind, and they worked with them on. So that's one element, is the cost part of it. And then the other part of it is obviously security. So again, just because you go to the cloud, I think the cloud services providers inherently have some pretty good models. I like the shared responsibility model. It's important to recognize that, like for instance with AWS. I know, Owen, I saw in the chat that you worked at Amazon. So you're probably more familiar with this than probably many of us, considering you were from the inside over there. But one of the things that I like is when the cloud services providers don't just beat you over the head and say, everything you do in the cloud is going to be safe, but it's this concept of shared responsibility. We'll protect our infrastructure, we'll protect our services as much as we can, but we can't be responsible for your workloads. We can't be responsible for your business logic, whatever it is that you want to do. And I think a lot of organizations fail to recognize that it's a shared responsibility model, and they just kind of assume that I'm going to go somewhere and I'm going to have protection, or I'm going to get security inherently based on what they're doing. You're going to get some things from them, but you're certainly not going to have a fix or something around your business logic, or if you have an over-provisioned account, right? You're still going to get burnt by that.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that this is actually a really nice segue to jump into the questions from the community. So I'm going to start with
Mariah. I just want to add one thing. So like Kunal saying, the security controls and the costs are things that you really have to watch out for. But I would actually over-rotate. You said be careful not to over-rotate. I would absolutely over-rotate. I think change is a hard thing, and people, moving is difficult. And if we don't over-rotate, it's going to go much slower than we think. And I think if we do over-rotate and we force the rotation, okay, and we find the right reason. We find, whether it's a, cost or pandemic, or it doesn't even matter, but we should over-rotate. And it's actually safe to over-rotate a little bit, because maybe 5 years ago, we didn't know how to do the equivalent security controls that we needed, or that we had built on-prem for 20 years. maybe we didn't have them, but we do have them all now. We know some of them come from the cloud providers, some of them come from us, but we need to over-rotate. That's it, enough. And if we don't, it'll take 10 times longer than it should.
Good clarification there, Ron. Thank you for jumping in.
And Ron, people are like who don't over-rotate are going to inherently get left behind much faster than some of the previous leaps. And like, look at the innovation and the technology development that we're seeing now and these different CSPs. Like we have data stores, and I know you're intimately familiar with this, but we have data stores now that we just never had before. And or it was just too complex for people to manage before. We have services now that we just never thought we could ever have before. And so if you don't embrace those things, then it might actually slow your business down in terms of adopting features or being competitive because you don't have the infrastructure to build features and capabilities that maybe your other competitors do, because they're embracing and they are over-rotating to embrace those new features and capabilities.
Yeah, completely. So let's continue on this same vein with a question from Simon Gunton. And big kudos to Simon. He was the person who posted the very first question in the community. So thanks, Simon. Do we ever see an end to data loss from leaky S3 buckets? And do you believe Amazon themselves are doing enough to alert users to this rather than relying on third-party tooling and audits to find that? I'm going to direct that question to you, Ron.
Yeah, it's a great question from the question itself, but it also it's like everything we talked about for the last 10 minutes is exemplified in that question. Okay, so let me answer the question first, but then I'll go back to kind of this over rotation thing. So you know, I don't think that S3 has any inherent flaw to it. Okay, and so the question of do we ever see an end to leaky buckets? The answer is yes, we will see an end to leaky buckets because it's all about the security controls. Okay, and there's no difference between S3 or a file system you put anywhere else, except that this is connected to the internet. Okay, that's the difference. If I took all my NetApp and all my NAS storage and I linked it to the internet, it would be exactly like S3. So you know, the controls that you put around your S3 buckets are what matter. The scanners you point at your S3 buckets to know which buckets have more sensitive data, less sensitive data are important. The IAM definitions you define are important. Now, some of the issues come with complexity and cost, right? So for example, Macy version 1 was, in my mind, just inoperable because it was too expensive. Okay, we once made a mistake and we ran a Macy scan on all our buckets, and that was the biggest bill we ever received by a factor of 10 from Amazon. Okay, and then we knew we were never going to use Macy again. Now Macy version 2 is better. But now there are other types of scanners. Right now, for example, we have a scanner for S3 buckets, and a lot of other people have scanners for S3 buckets. So I think technology is going to get better. It's going to resolve the cost issues. There is an inherent entitlement issue with S3. S3 is, you know, there's too many places where you specify policy around access to S3. There's the ACLs, there's IAM, there's assumed roles, there's machine roles. It just gets really complicated, and a lot of people don't necessarily understand this. And so the answer is yes, there is an end to S3 buckets. It does require us to provide, for example, a much easier policy mechanism so that you can enforce it and know what's going on. It requires the ability to do user behavioral analysis on access to S3 buckets. So that's coming or relatively new. But all of these things transform S3 buckets into, kind of areas that we were more familiar with and had good controls around. So yeah, I mean, and by the way, S3 is amazing. S3 is amazing when you look at what it gives you and the flexibility and some of the cost attributes and the attachment to Glacier. I would never give it up. I would never give it up. It is, by the way, the biggest, Amazon's the biggest database vendor today. It's no longer Oracle, right? I mean, there's more stuff on S3 than anything we've ever done as a not just size, variety, the way people use it, and the other cloud storage versions, as what it's doing to the human race, it's great. It's just so great. It's worth it. And the controls are there, and you can put the controls, and you don't have to have alert fatigue. You can manage this even today.
Great, thank you, Ron. Owen brought up at the beginning of this call IoT. So I want to ask a question to you, Kunal, regarding IoT. Nicholas Boucher submitted a question: with the continuation of turning almost any device into an IoT device, in what ways should companies and security-minded individuals work to ensure that their data is protected from the multitude of potential entry points for attack located in many of these systems?
This one keeps me up. This is a fun problem. So there are elements of this that can be solved, and then there's elements that just can't be. I remember, and I'll combine it with, I think, another question that came in from Malvika Shah around the mobile workforce, because I think they're actually a little bit linked. I remember when the very first iPhone came out, a lot of people were like, oh, this is great. It's a totally locked down, very secure thing. I remember working in a security group and a security team that plugged it in to a computer and attached a debugger, IDA, for those that have nerdy proclivities. And we attached the debugger to it, and we got to do all sorts of fun things to the phone. And I remember when the App Store came out and apps were released, we got to attach the phone to a computer, and we got to do all sorts of fun things with the debugger, changing the way that an application was running. And it was completely undetected, right? The platform doesn't know. The platform being iOS doesn't know. Apple didn't know what we were doing. And it's really interesting when I think of, and I'll connect this back to IoT, but it's really interesting when we think about how do you secure a mobile workforce. And you see things like app wrapping on mobile devices. You've seen things like SDKs that mobile applications can bring in. The reality is, if I'm an attacker, I can just get around it really easily. Right? And I can do all sorts of fun things. And again, it may not catch 100% of things. Maybe those techniques are good for catching some of those things. But if I'm really motivated, I'm going to find a way in. And the best example of that just kind of breaks everything is just what happens when you attach your phone to a debugger. What happens when you start fuzzing? What happens when you start bypassing those controls? What happens when you turn on airplane mode and you go completely offline? Then what? When no beacons are actually going forward. It's kind of one of the reasons why I adopted this start model a long, long time ago, which is no matter what we do, we can assume and we can think that we're protecting devices like these, or we think we can protect IoT devices, but it's really an intractable problem, right? It truly is an intractable problem, and we may put some good models, we may put some good ideas behind those things, but it's really difficult. And if we think that we're going to be 100% secure in terms of locking these devices down and making sure that people are doing the right thing, it's not going to happen. And so we might as well start looking at it from a different perspective, which is these sensors, these things that we carry around, these phones, IoT devices, ultimately these sensors are going to be communicating with something else. That something else could be some centralized brain. It could be communicating with some API or microservices or something else. Two parts to this would be, can you secure that hub? Can you secure the brain that these different devices are connecting to? And so thereby, when you have that secured hub, that secured brain, anything that's communicating with it and anything it is communicating with is secure or has some assurance or security protections in place. And then the other part is, can you actually monitor that information and information that's flowing through? I mean, we took a pretty big stance as a company at the beginning of the year. You've seen us as a company change the message of who we are and what we do. We're not just an app set company. We're not just a data set company. The idea is about protecting data and all the paths to it. And so that is the message that we have at this company at Imperva. And so for us, it's not just about protecting an application. It's not just protecting a API service. It's about protecting the information, because that's ultimately what the attacker is about. They're trying to steal information. They're trying to tamper information, trying to get access to data. And so you can protect the data store. You can protect all those instances in between. But how can you understand how that information is being accessed? How can you understand the actual journey that users or scripts or anything are taking to either influence or get access to that information all the way through? And so I try to find a way to connect those two things, because I really think they are connected, whether we're looking at mobile or IoT. You can't just trust one sensor. You have to think about the entire ecosystem, and you have to start thinking about how information is accessed and who's accessing it, where it's going, should they have the ability to do it, how many records are being accessed, is this normal? Those are the types of questions that we should be trying to answer, and what we are trying to do as a company, and I think a lot of other companies are trying to wrap their heads around as well.
Now, since you touched a little bit to Malvika's question, just as a follow-up, one of the things that she had secondary was more around the attack angle of that. So her question added on to this, talking about whether or not we expect as a company to see an increased level of attacks on mobile devices in 2021.
Yeah, and now I'll expand it out the other way. Yes, we will, and we'll also see it on IoT devices as well. We shut down really large botnets as a company every single month, and many of the botnets we're shutting down are from IoT devices or applications. I won't name the vendor or I won't name the operating system, but we shut a lot of things down. One of them that caught my attention relatively recently in the last few months was we shot down a really large botnet that was taking advantage of the Kodi player. I don't know if some of you are familiar with that. Maybe you like to watch entertainment. Kodi is this Python program that allows you to stream and watch all sorts of videos and television things, television shows, not things. I don't tell you how much TV I watch. And so people went ahead and they found a flaw in Kodi, and they were able to turn it into or incorporate them into a botnet. Anybody who is running this unpatched version of Kodi, if you went to install an update, or if whatever it is that you got some patch, you basically were able to be incorporated into a botnet. And we saw a really large botnet that we shut down recently. We identified, we called out, and it was really about, I think it was thousands and thousands of Kodi devices, or devices that were running Kodi all over the world, unpatched Kodi. And that's just a sign of, I think, what we're going to start to see more, whether it's mobile devices or IoT devices that are unpatched or that are running bespoke software, or things that people are running that just don't have the right hygiene.
Thank you for that, Kunal. Cloud seems to be the topic du jour, and so I want to take it back to Ron for a second and have us answer a question from Mark Krayenhagen, which, apologies, Mark, if I'm butchering your last name. What is cloud jacking, and what are the best prevention techniques to deal with it? Ron?
So it's really a credential hijacking attack where, let's take an example. Suppose our cloud account is really based on a large number of cloud accounts, but there is a single master account. Okay, and that master account is where we manage the privileges for all of the sub accounts. So cloud jacking is, somebody would hijack or try to hijack the credentials with which, like I would log into the master account where I could set all the permissions for the sub accounts. So it's, the ways you protect around this are similar to how you protect kind of your most important credentials, whether it's multi-factor authentication, whether it's strong authentication. Maybe you even remove the whole thing and not allow authentication based on or on the console. So for example, I only connect to our cloud accounts using a mixture of multiple providers. So for example, my Amazon credential, I'm running Google Authenticator as a second authentication option. The other thing you should probably do is just monitor and alert on any entry based on a specific set of rules. You should configure things like either IP tables or security groups or whatever the mechanism is to limit from which IP addresses you can connect or from which devices you can connect. So it's really standard things. Again, it's very risky because that one master account controls everything in our cloud account. So, you know, the risks are elevated because things become easier, but because they become easier and they are on the internet, you do need to make sure you have pretty good protections around those things.
And a question from Owen Rubel. It wasn't really phrased as a question, but I'm going to ask it as a question, and I'll ask it to both Kunal and Ron. Maybe starting with you, Ron, since you're just speaking. Popular third-party tools are the recipients of a large amount of hacker traffic looking for weaknesses on their networks. With the pandemic, can we expect to see an increased shortage of experienced software engineers that can help deep dive and troubleshoot this persistent issue? Ron, let's start with you.
Okay, I'll, you know, I was thinking about that question, and you know, the skill shortage in technology in general and in security has always been there and always gets worse. It always gets worse and worse. And we're trying to resolve, and it has, I don't think it has anything to do with the pandemic, okay? As kind of the people who build security software in the last 3 years, we've all taken the same approach that we need to create more and more playbooks. We need to create more and more integrations, more and more actions, so that we can free up people from doing the mundane kind of response things to doing some of these troubleshooting and diagnostics. The more we can provide playbooks that automate the things that you just always take up all of your time, connecting back to what Kunal was talking about with the fatigue, then we free up people. I think as an industry, we've been doing a pretty good job at that. I think we've the playbooks that we've created do free up time. So I think the main thing that we need to do is free up more and more time, because the people, we can't grow, we can't triple the number of professionals in a factor of 2 years. We just can't, okay? It's impossible. I think the pandemic, if you ask me, it actually has the opportunity to make things a little better, not worse. I think the fact that everybody is no longer working from an office, and even in the future, it's unclear how quickly we all go back to the office. I'll give you an example. It's something my son sent me yesterday. Okay, my son works in this industry. He got an email from his HR saying that anybody, apart from these two offices, I don't know why these two offices, next year in 2021, they're giving everybody this global WeWork pass. So you can go work from anywhere, work in any place on earth, okay? And he works in Boston. He said, hey, next year I'm just traveling. Every 2 months I'm going to a different country and I'm gonna work out of there. I think the pandemic and a lot of these changes that are happening at the HR level are creating an opportunity for us to get talent faster elsewhere. Okay, I remember every year we submit for a number of H-1 visas, and we always know we're only going to get a third of them, and we want to get more, but we can't. And now it doesn't even matter. Why would we submit for an H-1 visa? We're not going to move them to the U.S. So what does it matter where they are? So I think the pandemic is actually creating opportunity to get skilled resources faster, but it's gonna, like everything else in life, you kind of, it's like a blanket. You pull it to one side, you uncover something else. So now the issue is gonna be, well, how do we know who we're hiring? How do we know whether we can trust who we're hiring? How do we know that they're not the point of compromise? But I think, somewhere along the lines of trying to get the stupid things not to require human people and freeing up that time, plus the ability to get resources who have the skills faster. If we figure out how to make sure that we're not like hiring someone we can't trust or that does damage, then I think things are going to get much better going forward.
Kunal, anything to add to that?
Yeah, so I agree with what Ron's saying. I think this is actually an incredible turning point for our industry. And the reason why I think that is, for a long, long time, there have been pockets where like a congregation or congregations of specific people in our industry reside, right? Like it's the Bay Area, it could be Boston, it could be tech hubs, right? But there are hubs, right, for the most part. And I think what we're seeing is, and you can just see the math, a lot of people leaving these large hubs because they can be anywhere, they can work from anywhere now. And if you play this out, you're already seeing tech companies that are just shutting down their headquarters. We saw Walmart just for their technology side get rid of all their offices. There's no office for Walmart and anybody who's working on Walmart.com. And they're going to keep some places for meeting spaces. And you now see this also at other large tech companies that are just shutting these things down. So what's happening is you get these great sort of almost like a disaggregation. These large cities are being disintermediated. And you have these smart people that are just going to go work from anywhere, like Ron's son, like wanting to go travel the world, or other people that may not want to be in a big city, that may want to go back to their hometown. I grew up in a small town. It would have been amazing, right, if I could have built my career out of that small town. It just wasn't practical at that time. And I think for a lot of people, having that opportunity and that ability will do two things. One, it'll obviously improve things for the local GDP for that area, but it may also, and I hope, and I'm an optimist, but I hope that having those smart people outside of cities like the Bay Area or these tech hubs may be good things, because they may catalyze and encourage people to start thinking about technology or building up technology education at an earlier stage, at an earlier place. That's what I'm hopeful of. I've got 2 kids under 2.5, and I would love for them to get exposed to things like technology and even things like cybersecurity at a younger age. It's important for them to, given where we are as a world and where we're going. And so I'm hopeful that with all this disaggregation, with these cities that are kind of hopefully kind of these smart people in these large cities that are going to go back to smaller cities, smaller towns, that they will improve the overall quality of education around our industry, so that 10, 15, 20 years from now, we're going to be able to look back at this and say, well, this was one of the sort of catalysts, or one of the many things that we saw in the last couple of decades that helped us get to where we are, which is graduating more people that have an interest in this space, that want to make a difference. So I'll be an optimist, and I agree with Ron.
Awesome. The next series of questions I want to jump into are coming back home a little bit to Imperva products and services and solutions and capabilities. So to everybody on the phone, if you have additional follow-ups to these kind of larger topics, please, again, continue to put comments or questions in the chat. But Ron, I'm going to pass it back to you. CJ Kuo, in the DAM product line, there are on-premise cloud data security and virtual devices that can be opened on AWS. As well as with the introduction of JSonar, how can we integrate these products or distinguish the differences to help customers make the best plan?
Yeah, it's, because we have invested a lot very quickly, okay, then maybe it's not clear enough. So let me try to describe it. Just given the amount of investment we've made and the fact that everything gets covered, there is this question of, okay, so what would you use first? So if you're using if you're okay, so what do you have on cloud? You have really, I would just break it down into two main things. Okay, one is services that you get. So you can get a database as a service. You can get a storage system as a service. And those are things like, RDS or Redshift or S3 or Azure SQL or Azure Synapse or GCP BigQuery. When you use those services, then you need something that integrates directly with the cloud. You have two Imperva products that you can use to do this. You can either use CDS for AWS and AWS RDS, Redshift, things like that, or you use Imperva Sonar. And the differentiation of when you would use each one of them is usually the type of functionality that you need and whether or not you already have Imperva DAM on-prem. So if you're just starting from nothing and you're a smaller company and you're born on cloud and you want a very simple, immediate support for securing these services, then you would use CDS, Cloud Data Security, because that's a SaaS solution. You don't have to install anything. Extremely simple, like that. Okay, you just deploy it and you get the value immediately. And it's a closed system. Okay, it's a SaaS. You just log in. You're 100% user. If you are a bigger company and you're not only on cloud, you're some combination of cloud and on-prem. So you might have SecureSphere on-prem, but you need support for cloud. Then you would use the Imperva Sonar system for your cloud database as a service, and you'd bring in the on-prem DAM into the same pane of glass, and that's how you would get both on-prem and cloud. And that's all when you use services. If on the other hand, you're not using a database as a service, you're just installing your own database on a virtual machine that happens to run on the cloud, it's no different really than an on-prem system. So at that point, you have two options. You can either go with an agent approach, and just like you would put an Imperva agent on, I don't know, an Oracle server on-prem, you can put it on an Oracle server running on a VM, or you can use an agentless approach. At the end of the day, the data would look the same. But that's how you should think about it.
CJ, I know you're on, so if you have any follow-up questions, please do add them. Follow up to this because it's a similar kind of topic, Ron, from Shavdar Nikolov. If we're using Imperva on-premise and we have set up a lot of policies, rules, reports, etc., can we still use the same policies, rules, and reports if we move our database to the cloud?
So the answer is yes. Our goal at Imperva is to make that shift into the cloud or migration into the cloud as transparent as possible. I can tell you that we're not perfect right now, meaning some of that transition, depending on kind of the options I described before, some of them would be exactly the same, and some of it would be really a migration of policies because the devil's in the details, in the sense that once you're using a database as a service, sometimes the attributes and the values about the events or the kind of the event structure is very different than the ones you can get when you have an on-prem database. And so at that point, it does depend on your policies a little bit. It does depend a little bit on the reports. And we are trying to make it as seamless as possible. I think every release, we're issuing a release now every, approximately 3 months. And some of the things that we're doing every release is trying to consolidate it, that the abstractions that we use are a little different so that it's not so much tied to the underlying platform, at which point it will be very transparent. So in full transparency, I don't think it's 100% seamless today. I think it'll be 100% seamless by mid next year.
Okay. Kunal, back to you. Question from Tolga Bat. Can Imperva WAF bridge slash sniffing mode, can it intercept and get the traffic like other reverse or routing mode?
So we have some Cypher support. We can do things like termination and some type of manipulation. And this is for elliptical curve Diffie-Hellman, so ECDH. And we can do things like URL rewriting. We could do that in transparent reverse proxy and TRP. We recently released a version, and that version has what we call Advanced Bridge. And in Advanced Bridge, it adds support for lots of many ciphers. I believe it's almost the entire cipher suite. So that's the high level of that question. I think I'm understanding it correctly in terms of able to do some manipulation. And of course, there's other types of proxy modes that exist that give you greater types of manipulation if you want. But that's what it's like in transferring reverse proxy or TRP.
Thank you, Kunal. Now we're coming up on 10 minutes left to the hour. As I'm going through the additional questions in the community, there's kind of like 3 or 4 that are focused on reporting. Robert Miller, Matthew Hogan, a couple other folks. We're asking some questions on MX and things like what's the roadmap? How can we use increased capability as MX needs to be regionally located? Can policies and global objects be exported from one MX and imported into another? There's kind of like a whole host of questions around just general reporting. Ron, is that something that you can talk to at a high level?
Okay. So at a high level, we are doing a lot of work on MX right now. I think, like if you look at the last 2 or 3 years, probably MX has gotten the least amount of work on it compared to maybe other components in Secure Sphere. Right now, it's going to get a lot more effort. And the reason is that because we now need to kind of merge these 3 worlds together, the 3 worlds being Secure Sphere agents with agentless coverage of databases and cloud, to us, the master configurator is MX. Now, MX is both a configurator and a reporting server and a whole bunch of other things. What we really want to do with MX is, when we're merging the 2 products, the classic Secure Sphere with the reporting and long-term retention data lake that comes with the Sonar platform, then a lot of the complexities and limitations of reporting that MX used to have go away. And so a lot of the reporting capabilities are going to grow by an order of magnitude by just running them on the Sonar platform, leaving the MX to become primarily the configuration system. And so on the configuration side, it's going to become very powerful. Like, for example, the number of MXs is going to be reduced by an order of magnitude. The topology distribution limitations are going to go away. And on the flip side, all of the reporting issues are immediately go away, like from day one, from today, go away, because all of the large scale reporting, the need to have SOM, for example, all that goes away because you're really running the reports on the Sonar data lake instead. So I think it's all good news. Some of it exists today. All the reporting exists today. The configuration merge is something that will happen next year.
And one other thing to add is if folks are looking at doing replication, or they're looking to take policy objects and replicate them across other MXs, we have written loads of scripts to help with that transformation. We have a very series of large customers that have asked us for this. And so we developed scripts and we developed application programs last year to assist in that process. So in between, while you're waiting for this transition, if you are looking for that help in terms of replication of policies, configuration objects, we'd be happy to help out. Happy to get you those scripts, and we can walk you through it as well with folks from our team.
Just based on the types of questions, I'm sure many folks in the community will take you up on that, Kunal.
Yeah,
Robert.
So Craig's on, and there's another person on my team, Brian Anderson. Between Craig and Brian, they'll make sure that you all get the help that you need in terms of being able to replicate things. No problem.
Thank you. And Robert Miller, I know you had one of the questions around this, so if you have any follow-ups, please do add it to the chat. So that rounds out, I think, the core questions that were posted in the community and some in the chat. Chris, I'll bring you back into the loop here. Do we want to open it up in case the folks on the phone have additional things that have come up during the discussion?
Yeah, so, wow. Kunal, Ryan, Ron, thank you so much. And thank you so much to the community for asking these questions. I was chatting with some folks individually, and one person was saying, Ron, he's been following you since, a long time, and was super excited to hear about this. And it's the first time he's got to hear Kunal speak about some stuff, and was excited to hear, what Kunal had to say, and was really enjoying it. So there's some really good feedback there, and guys and everyone, thank you for coming. I don't see any other posts. I looked on the community and I looked in my chat. There's nothing there, but just a reminder, this is the last webinar for this year. We will start it back up in January. Certainly excited about that. Two is we will be, if you posted on the community, we will be putting you into a drawing and draw 3 names. And then once we draw those 3 names, we will, I will reach out to you individually for your address and some things like that. But everyone, thank you so much for coming. I paused a second just to look over at the chat. I don't see any other chat questions, and I think that will conclude for today. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Kunal. Thanks, Ron, for your time. Really, really appreciate it.
Thanks, Anand.
Great.
And thank you all in the community. I've seen some of you across the last several months as we participated, and as a huge shout out to Chris. You've done an amazing job pulling this community together. And for those that have been tuning in week after week or community webinar after webinar, thank you all so much. And I think we're all really looking forward to kicking this back off again super strong in 2021. Between Ron and myself, we've got all sorts of fun things to share with you regarding product updates, the roadmap, and really excited to share with you what's coming and give you all some sneak peeks at the beginning of the year. So looking forward to it.
I'll say one last thing because
I think given the amount of posts that Owen made, I think you should get one of the 3.
Yeah.
I want to say this is people are so interested in this that they stayed up till 2 a.m. to get on. So a couple of people are from Singapore. And several people are from in Europe and things like that. So people are staying up late or early in their morning to actually be on this call. It's amazing to me, some of the folks that get up, or I don't know if they take a nap in between or something, but but this is cool. This is really awesome. This really pumped me up. It was super exciting. It's the first time I got to hear Ron speak, and it was very just inspiring. Kunal's always inspiring, so thank you guys so much for everything, and I look forward to the new year. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah, us as well. Thanks, Chris.
Bye-bye.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.